Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time this late in the day on day 2 of a conference. I'd certainly recognise we stand between a couple more presenters and drinks at the conference dinner tonight. So we'll try to keep this quite lively. Don't want to put any more pressure on the panellists, but we'll try and make this quite engaging and really open to questions. We're going to have 4 speakers, as you can see on the screen. And then after that, we're going to have around 30 minutes of Q&A. So for those who don't know me, my name is Barry Cozier, the Director of Sustainability at the Australian Food and Grocery Council. And with me today, as you can see on the screen, is Andrea Polson, Marketing Director from Licella. So Andrea is going to talk through the end market opportunities and the processing that's coming online for processing soft plastics and other plastics to get it back into food grade. Andrea Baldwin, Team Leader from Albury City Council, will talk through the trials that are running in Albury City Council to collect soft plastics. Then we'll hear from Deb Cailes. Deb is the Exec Director of Strategy Procurement and Planning at Recycling Vic. Deb has an amazing background in manufacturing, and in government and in local council. So she's worked through the whole supply chain. So we'll hear from Deb about what Recycling Victoria is doing in this space around infrastructure. And finally, we'll hear from Helen Millicer, who's the Director of One Planet Consulting, who is working with the AFGC to help us design a global best practice scheme. So Helen's I'll get this right, a Churchill Fellow who did her Churchill Fellowship on global best practice and product stewardship. So as the AFGC, we've gone to someone who's an expert in the field. So why are we doing all this? Most of you will have seen the headlines of late of Red Cycle collapsing. So whilst that is a surprise and it's abhorrent that it's happened, the AFGC recognised it was going to be constrained over the years and started working on this project 3 years ago. So we knew that end markets were critical. You need to develop end markets if you're going to collect. We knew that there was more volume starting to come into that scheme than it could cope with. It was a very, very much a surprise that it actually collapsed. So with soft plastics being about 40% of all plastic packaging put on the market, we need to find secure end markets. So in the development of this scheme, we started with the end market. So I won't say any more. I'll hand over to Andrea Polson, who'll talk through the end market opportunities of the Licella technology. Thank you.
Need to move this microphone down slightly. Thank you again for inviting me to be here today, and I'll be excited to share some of the work that we're doing in Australia and look a little at the global landscape for chemical recycling or advanced recycling and how it's helping to drive end markets for soft plastic recovery and other problematic plastics. So just to start, currently, everything that's made from fossil oil, there's an opportunity to make it from plastic that would otherwise be sent to landfill or incineration. Now, chemical recycling, turning plastic back into the oil that it originally came from, which can then go back into the system to make new plastic, makes that possible. So it's a true circular economy solution for plastics that can't otherwise be recycled. So we're not interested in the plastic that currently has a home and has a value through mechanical recycling or other applications. We're specifically targeting plastic that would otherwise not be recovered. So some examples here, you can see these are feedstocks that we've processed through our commercial demonstration facility on the New South Wales Central Coast. So the far left, that's soft plastic from agricultural applications, MRF rejects, so rigids that are not viable for mechanical recycling, and then of course soft plastics as well, which is going to be the focus of the talk today. But just wanted to make that point that we're looking at a wide range of end-of-life plastics. Okay. So as I mentioned, chemical recycling is a true circular economy solution for soft plastic. So how does it work? So we take soft plastic, so the example here of post-consumer packaging, goes through a process of collection and sorting and then comes to us. So a facility like ours, which is a chemical recycling facility, which takes that plastic, takes it back to the oil that it came from, so it's chemically equivalent to a refined fossil oil, which we call plastic crude or plastic-derived oil. From there, that plastic goes back into the plastic supply chain to make post-consumer recycled content. And the important point of difference here is that it's food grade. So currently, advanced recycling or chemical recycling is the only pathway to take post-consumer packaging back to food grade food grade recycled content. And of course, that enables the magic of recycled plastic packaging, which is what we know the global brands are moving towards. They've made firm commitments to, and some are already transitioning towards. So the example here of the Kit Kat pilot that was produced right here in Australia, utilising chemical recycling technology. And of course, this sort of innovation is only possible through true industry-wide collaboration. So what does that mean? So a systems approach whereby the risk is shared across the supply chain, the cost and the value is shared. And that is really critical to the success. So all the companies that were involved in producing this first-of-kind packaging with recycled content needed to be brave, take risks, and do things differently. So we can't expect to keep doing the same thing and get a different outcome. We're really asking people to do something different. So right from the collection, whether that's through drop-off points or through bag in a bin trials. So we worked with Curbcycle and Kirby on this particular pilot, and then the MRF operators, through to, of course, chemical recycling, and then the refiner, who was the Viva refinery in Geelong, who took that plastic. They utilised what they call the ISCC Plus mass balance approach, which is a certification process whereby they can say each barrel of plastic-derived oil or plastic crude that we put into the process offsets 1 barrel of fossil oil. So it's a certification and accreditation process to provide the confidence to the people making these investments and taking these risks and making these bold choices that what we're committing to doing is actually happening. So it's a traceability. Right through to, again, the polymer manufacturers and the packaging manufacturers, so Amcor, Tagleaf, LyondellBasell, in this case, who made the polypropylene, and then back to the brand, so Nestle. So it was a true example of a plastic circular economy in action. So advanced recycling or chemical recycling, so I use the terms interchangeably, but how did we get to where we are today? And why are we only just starting to hear about chemical recycling? I guess the answer to that is that chemical recycling has been around for some time. Now, some of you might have heard of pyrolysis. And another approach, gasification, which takes the plastic back to gas and then reproduced the liquids from that. So our process is a little different. So Licella, we have a process which is a hydrothermal liquefaction process, which sounds like a mouthful, but it's actually a combination of some simple things. So hydro being water, thermal being heat. So our process is both a thermal and a chemical process. The cool thing about it is that water is actually our chemical. Pyrolysis also has been around for a lot longer. It was developed in a non-carbon constrained world. So it does work, and you certainly do get oil. However, the reason that it hasn't been scaled to a broad extent is that it will produce a lower yield of oil, whereas because we're heating in the absence of oxygen, we don't have as controlled a conversion of plastic to oil, whereas hydrothermal, having water in the process, and again, I promised myself I wasn't going to get too technical because I am a marketing person, but it's difficult to explain it without getting a little bit technical. Utilising water, the benefit is that you do get a high conversion of plastic to oil, and you also operate at lower temperatures. So it moderates the reaction, and therefore you get higher value, more oil with a lower carbon footprint. So I'll go through this quickly, but this is just an overview of the process and how it works. So plastic gets prepared, so feedstock's prepared. We specifically target polyolefins, so polyethylene, LDPE or HDPE, high density polyethylene, and polypropylene. We do have a tolerance for things like PVC, however, we try to avoid it as much as possible because you will still get some residual amounts of chlorine through to the oil, but we can process a small quantity. So that oil gets pressurised and heated and melted and mixed with supercritical water. So water under high temperature and pressure, you can think about it like a big pressure cooker. It diffuses through the plastic and breaks it apart, and that's how we turn it from a solid, being plastic, into a liquid, being the oil. So it spends about 20 minutes in our reactors, and the end product is 85% oil and around 15% a process gas, which can be used back through the process as energy to power the supercritical boiler. So it's a very efficient process. I wanted to mention a new study that's come out because I think it helps to contextualise where chemical recycling fits within the waste hierarchy. So we see chemical recycling as being complementary to mechanical recycling. So taking the plastic that can't be economically recycled via mechanical means, either because it's degraded, contaminated, or it's mixed to a point where it can't be separated into those different polymer types. This was a study that was done out of the EU through their Joint Research Centre, which looked at an LCA, so a life cycle assessment, looking at 3 thermal advanced plastic recycling technologies. So they looked at pyrolysis, hydrothermal liquefaction, of which Licella's technology fits, and they also benchmarked against waste to energy and mechanical recycling in terms of carbon emissions. So some of the key findings from that study, which I thought were interesting, were that all recycling is preferable to energy recovery. Now, I know there's been a lot of discussion at the conference on energy from waste, and I think there is a place within the waste hierarchy, but for plastic, anything that can be recycled should be. And the data confirms that, both from an economic and environmental standpoint. Hydrothermal liquefaction in particular, out of the technologies looked at, had a global warming potential that was 50% lower than pyrolysis. And because it can process a wide range of plastics, it complements mechanical recycling. So this isn't something that we've just been doing overnight. We have, so Licella is a local technology development company with a global footprint. So we've spent 15 years through our CAD-HTR technology development to get to where we are today. So on the right, you'll see our commercial demonstration facility at Summersby, which supports the commercial facilities under development globally. So just quickly, this is a map of the global facilities that we have under development, either through partners, licensing partners, or directly in a joint venture, or through Licella. So our facility that we're developing in Victoria, which I'll get to in the next slide, is will be first to be second in terms of the technology at full commercial scale. So the first commercial facility is actually nearing completion in Wilton in the northeast of the UK. And we have a project for biomass, so that it's a technology platform. We also work in the renewable space to create biocrude from biomass residues like sugarcane, so sustainable aviation fuel from agricultural residues. So we have a project in Canada which will be completed later in the year. So what are we building here in Australia? So we're building Australia's first full-scale commercial facility to utilise advanced chemical recycling under Advanced Recycling Victoria. It's with our local Australia-developed CAD-HTR technology at the core. The facility will be built in 3 stages. So at full capacity, it will process 120,000 tonnes per year of end-of-life plastics, which will be producing 100,000 tonnes per annum of plasticrude. So that's the scale up. So the first stage is 20,000 tonnes of end-of-life plastic, and that's what we have the EPA development licence for. So we were granted an EPA development licence in December 2022, around the same time that we announced the investment from Amcor. So industry is investing and coming along, and this is happening and it's real. There's a schematic of the engineering render for the stage 1 of the facility. If you do want to find out more about Advanced Recycling Victoria, we've got a website as well. I think it's advancedrecyclingvictoria.com. We did receive $12 million through the federal government's Modern Manufacturing Initiative for stage 1. We're targeting commissioning in the second half of 2024. It will utilise 100% renewable electricity and recycled water through the facility. And as I mentioned, the target feedstocks are end-of-life polyethylene, polypropylene from streams including post-consumer packaging, so soft plastics, mechanical recycling rejects, and then various product stewardship schemes. And the certification of that recycled content will be really important to underpin the investment. And as I mentioned, with the KitKat pilot, we utilise that ISCC plus mass balance approach. So just quickly, this is the commercial facility which is nearing completion in the UK. So this is under our joint venture partner Mura. So you can see there on the far right our vertical reactor column. So it's really exciting. We'll get a lot of data from that, and that is actually underpinned by a $100 million investment from Dow. So the big petrochemical companies are investing in advanced recycling because they understand and acknowledge that it has an important part to play in our future low-carbon circular economy. So my final slide, possibly the most controversial, is how do we fix a broken system and restore confidence? Well, I think we need a systems approach. And if you look at that KitKat pilot, that wouldn't have happened without each person along the value chain making bold and brave choices. So collection is really important, but it's not the only piece of the puzzle. We need to look at the whole system. We can't continue to kick the can down the road because you know what? We've run out of road. So we need to invest in downstream infrastructure for these problematic streams of plastic. Otherwise, we will never reach our national waste targets for plastic. Advanced recycling is a scalable solution to the challenge of industrial scale recycling of soft plastic. We need policy that supports the circular economy to create that pull-through for the post-consumer recycled resin, because brands will be paying a premium, a 2 to 3 times premium. They've made commitments, they've started to import this. The gap between the supply and the demand continues to grow both locally and globally. So we know the market demand is there, but we need the policy in place to help drive it until the price normalises. We need a well-regulated waste sector where transparency, accountability and traceability are core values. And that's because it's essential to underpin the investment and the confidence and create pull-through for the recycled content. So small-scale solutions, whilst interesting, they won't address the issue. Advanced recycling at scale provides the value uplift to underpin the cost of wide-scale aggregation and collection. And that's the point I'd like to leave on, is building a local circular economy is possible, but it requires a systems transformation. And it will only be achieved through bold, brave, and collective action. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Now I'd like to invite Andrea. Andrea Baldwin from Albury City Council. Really a segue from that, the last slide about collection. So I think the facility in the UK is $100 million, and you don't want to build a $100 million plant without feedstock. So we'll hear from Andrea, who's just going to talk about the collection trials in Albury.
Got a little bit of show and tell. Thank you for that introduction, Barry. Okay, so where do we start? So we were part of the pilot programs that have been going for some time now. And what I'm going to talk about is a little bit about the impacts on council and also on the community feedback that we've received. Also wanted to recognise that even the partners in this pilot program need to be recognised for how brave they are for participating in this trial, because we are all trying to contribute towards finding a solution. So congratulations to those pilot partners. Okay, so just to kick off today, I am focusing mainly on the Albury-Wodonga region because that's mainly where I know all my data from. One of the speakers today, Helen, has shared a little bit of other information, so I'll go over that as well as we progress in relation to some of the partner councils. Just to let you know, we did partner with Cleanaway, so they came on board. There is a MRF in Albury, so they were obliging to actually accommodate and accept this material as part of a curbside collection. We opted to place this bag, the orange bag, which I'll show you shortly, into the fortnightly recycling curbside collection service. And we felt that that was the best way to actually to manage this program. We also just wanted to highlight that we are focusing again on all of those plastics that are generated from within our household, and predominantly what is generated from the kitchen soft plastic program. And very similar to the plastic that is part of the Red Cycle program, as we know of previously. Okay. When we have a look at our pilot, there's been over 7,000 households participate in the pilot, and they're all listed there as to the council areas that are participating. You'll find that we've all opted for different options. So you can have an opt-in, or you could pre-select some locations that would participate in the trial. We all trialled different bags as well. So some that you can see there are post-pack style, where we issued 15 bags via Australia Post. We used the Kirby system as well, and we also used where you can do a tie-up arrangement at the top of the bag. So we needed to just test a few different models, and that sort of redesign and co-design will continue as we progress further as well. So again, I just wanted to mention that I am really just talking about Albury-Wodonga for most part of my presentation. What we did do was we chose pre-selected locations in both Albury and Wodonga and issued 1,000 households with packs of 15 bags each. In looking at our results, I see that most households have used only about 6 bags each, which is quite interesting. But also there are other aspects of that which we'll talk about throughout the presentation. So as I mentioned, we did distribute this via Australia Post. That was the main form of communications right at the start of the program, or the pilot program, and we found that that's something that we'll need to consider in the future, because that was, it is difficult to then communicate with households when that was the main form of communication at the start. We weren't doing follow-up mail outs, as part of the program. Okay, so when we speak about the trial started in November through to about March for about an 18-week period. We identified that many thought that they needed to put the bag in the recycling bin every fortnight, even though it wasn't full. So we found that a lot of the bags were actually half full or less than half full, and it does have the capacity to hold about 800 grams worth of soft plastic. So that, again, is just an education component that we need to consider, and we were wanting to aim to have a cushion type effect with the bags. I'll just give you a bit of a show and tell about what the bag looked like. For our pilot program, we also had a bit of a sticky at the top, where others tried a tied-up arrangement as well. So there were a few variables with that. What we did also find that whilst the bag, when it was collected, it went to the local MRF, occasionally there would be a few tears in the bag, and that's just something that we need to consider as we move forward and decide what might be the most appropriate bag that we do use. Also just wanted to mention contamination. As anyone knows with any program, there is always going to be a level of contamination in a program, and I think you'll find that mainly the contamination was around people not understanding what the type of plastic was needed as part of the program. So for me, most of it was around perhaps they put in a hard plastic bottle when they didn't really realise that it was around soft plastics and not hard plastics. So that's the main form of contamination that we found. So of our 2,000 households, what we did also find, people didn't want to participate. So we had 591 single bags thrown back into the recycling bin. And so they were returned back to the MRF and we grabbed those out. That did represent about 2% of our population that were in the trial. So that's an interesting fact for us all to know, is that not everyone wants to participate in the program. We also encouraged residents just to keep going post the trial once it was finished as well. We found that a lot of them really wanted to keep going, and so we allowed the option for those that wanted to keep going with the service to continue that on, and we've kept collecting those at the local MRF. If families would like to access more bags, they can also come to council and collect those from us as well. What we did find is that post the trial, 2.3 tonnes has been collected and sent off to APR in Melbourne, where they're processing that into an oil fuel product. Okay, so when we talk about some of the feedback, and this has come through the survey that's been conducted post the trial. It's also, we have a program called Halve Waste in our region, so our education team would also hear this information, as well as our customer service teams. So there was overwhelmingly positive feedback on the trial, and a large number of anecdotal and customer service requests to participate. The community loved the fact that they could participate in a program that removed this material from their bin. And as we know, the majority of our red bins really are made up of soft plastics. We did think that convenience would have actually been one of the key items that people were attracted to the program, but it wasn't. The first thing was actually that the results showed that they wanted to see that something was happening in a circular program and that the products were going back into something to be remade into a new product. So that was one of the key items that was found as part of the survey. The second one was collaboration. The community thought it was great to see that industry and council were actually collaborating together to find a result in this space. And the third one was the convenience. So that's interesting. We found that quite a big ticket item that we were quite surprised at. We do find that education is needed on an ongoing basis. So we need to find a way to actually communicate with our community a little bit better as this progresses as well. The other thing I just did want to mention, I just had a look at the survey results a little bit earlier today. There was a negative comment, and someone actually put down there, "Can you fix the roads because they're a disgrace?" So I thought that was interesting. Any chance they've got, they will always put down what they think, don't they? All right, as far as feedback goes, back to our customer service team as well, we had about 80 calls all up. 10 people just said they didn't want to participate, or they're going away on holidays and they wouldn't be around for that period of time. So, or they just put the bags back in the bin, as we referenced as well earlier. It makes you realise that you really do need a customer service element when you've got a program like this, as the trial did receive, in excess of 80 phone calls. We do need to make slight improvements to the program, and that'll be a continual process, as with any initiative that councils take on or things that are new and innovative. There'll always be tweaks to programs as you progress. We did have one resident that just complained and just said, "I don't want to, why is this even needed?" So, you're always going to have that pushback as well from different people. Something that we found, we have a Halve Waste education team that were on the ground to help with any questions in relation to the program. And of all those bags that were returned to us, we packed them up again and we were able to offer another 40 households a soft plastic service, which is a great outcome. And as a bit of a side hustle, I must also mention that team, we undertake a lot of bin assessments, particularly if a resident would like to upsize from a 140 to a 240 litre. We were able to actually use this program as a way for them not to upsize their bin. So great outcome, that one. So that's an exciting factor I think we need to consider. When we look at the anecdotal feedback, as you can see on the screen, some thought that the bag size was too small, didn't fit in their kitchen bin. They prefer bags on a roll with ties. They would like access to more liners. And maybe an opt-in system would actually reduce contamination, and you're really focusing on those people that are invested and wanting this to work. Okay, so as a council, what are the impacts? Well, for me, I'm a landfill manager, so I think this is a great outcome. I'd love to see 200 tonnes of less plastic coming to my landfill, so that's a positive. But how does this get distributed to our community? How is this to be done, and perhaps at what cost? What's that community engagement piece look like? And I suppose even for ourselves, we know that the community is a little bit mistrusting at this point in time about the programs that are out there and available. And who will own this program as well? Often a council, we're the conduit between industry and the community, and I don't want to be left holding the baby, as they say. From a community perspective, largely they supported the program. They thought it was very convenient, and we talked about, they also thought it was important that there's collaboration and a circular opportunity as well. It's an easier service to manage at the curbside. You don't have to take it to the supermarket. Nothing can be easier than whilst it's at your own home. What is that cost for the service as well is a concern for our residents. And perhaps, as I mentioned, we do look at those invested recyclers in our communities who just want to have an opt-in service. From a MRF operator point of view, in our region, I'm one of 8 councils that are in a curbside collection contract, and we have 70,000 households. So that represents about 18,000 bales of material that will go through that MRF, which has not been, they previously haven't seen that material before. So it's okay in a trial phase to actually manage a few hundred bags, but if that turns to being a full-scale service, we need to consider how that will impact our MRFs as well. Storage and transport will obviously be a concern, and we're obviously adding another product to a already, full facility, a full recycling facility. So just in final, so what are our next steps? Well, obviously we need to continue to provide feedback to our community, let them know we are still working on this issue. The end goal is to obviously expand the service, and we're here to support a wider project and look at the co-design of bags and collaborating on messaging to get this program out there. For Albury-Wodonga, we want our residents to keep participating in this program for as long as they can, and we need to make sure that we do celebrate the successes. So when we're sending that material down to Melbourne to be turned into an alternative product, we need to be sharing those stories with our community as well. Okay. And for myself, I love being a partner to support such a wonderful initiative, and look forward to what transpires in the future with this program. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Now we'll hear from Deb Cailes. So as I mentioned before, Deb works for Recycling Victoria, and really critical that government is involved in any infrastructure projects like this. We're not just talking the advanced recycling, we're talking the whole supply chain. So we know there's modifications to MRFs required. We know there will be infrastructure with pre-processing, and then ultimately mechanical and advanced recycling. So all of that needs to be planned across the country. So we're just going to hear from Deb about what the Victorian government is looking at.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone here. And I've got to say, New South Wales is turning it on. Come from Melbourne. It's probably raining and grey down there. So I'm grateful that I am here. Get all of this working. So Recycling Victoria, what are we? We're a brand new entity. We've only been around since 1st of July last year, and it was as a result of a policy that was put in place by Victorian government to say we need to do a little bit more to shift the needle on strengthening the sector. Hence Recycling Victoria, which is a waste authority, was born. We work in partnerships with our other state agencies like the EPA. We've got quite a few. We're pretty lucky in Victoria. We've got Sustainability Victoria. We've got Recycling Victoria, quite a lot of support for the community. Some of our immediate and early priorities since 1st of July last year was to stand up a container deposit scheme. So we had a recent announcement, and that's in the machinations now of being developed so that it can go live in November, which is pretty exciting for Victoria. We used to have one when I was a kid, so it's nice to know that it's coming back. Inaugural whole of sector risk and contingency planning, that's something that fits in my portfolio. So really helping to understand what are the vulnerabilities across the sector and how can we share risks, understand the risks, understand the right controls, and then share those controls. And I've heard risk come up quite a few times in the presentations I've seen here. Service standards for the bin systems, data provision. We launched a hub last week or the week before, which is pretty cool, so making sure there's data out there and people can be informed. Our waste to energy systems, we've got a CAP environment in Victoria, and that's something Recycling Victoria will manage, as well as strategic procurement for local government and building our long-term infrastructure plan. We love a bit of data. And there are different challenges for different material streams. We do a lot of assessment on the different material streams so we understand what's going on. As most plastics are strong, lightweight, inexpensive, they're widely used. I'm speaking to an audience that clearly understands that, and they are a problem. The properties of different material streams have a profound impact on their ability to be economically recycled, and so too does the simplicity by which the material can be separated or remain separate. To streamline the repair, reuse or recycling process. So in summary, of the 490,000 tonnes of curbside materials collected between July 21 and April 22, 80% was sent to downstream processing, 20% was sent to landfill. These kinds of diagrams can appear on our data hub. So if you go to that link, you can see a whole lot for a whole lot of different types of materials as well. This slide is an example of the diagnostic work that the team do to analyse different information and understand the problem. So we quite often seek the wisdom of different consultants and then pull that in with our internal intel and try and pull the problem apart, striate the data, look at it in different ways, trying to see where the actual issues are. You can see here plastics are prevalent in all sectors of the economy, and in Victoria 683,000 tonnes of plastic waste was generated, of which almost 85% was sent to landfill. Total business-to-business plastics amount to around 26,000 tonnes per annum. The exact business-to-business soft plastics is not known. But you can see they're trying to unpack it and understand what is and isn't being recycled, how it's operating, gives us clues to which parts of the system we need to invest in. Despite investments that have been made, and in Victoria there have been a lot of investments that I'll go through, plastic will continue to be sent to landfill as generation continues to outstrip processing capacity. Actions to improve circularity are being taken both in the demand and supply chain of the cycle, and that's really what I wanted to emphasise today. We do need to look at it as a system and make sure that we understand the weaknesses across the system. Circular economy for soft plastic packaging needs to be underpinned by stewardship, regulation, ongoing consumer and business education to encourage reduced consumption in the first place. So the next few slides, what I'm going to go through is each of those steps in the value chain, talk a little bit about the problem, a little bit about the goal, and what Victoria's tried to do. I note also I've put little ticks as my bullet points. I'm not claiming we've fixed the problem, but I do believe this is a difficult one, so we celebrate successes. So a little tick for me is at least we're on the right track. Here, in the creation space, there remains material entering the system that's difficult to recycle. I mean, it's one of the key issues. Stop it from coming in or understand and limit the things that can't be recycled, with a goal to align packaging design and use with an improved system for recovery and market development. So the Victorian government's addressing this plastic recycling through banning single-use lightweight plastic bags. That happened in November 2019. And then introduced a ban on other problematic single-use plastic items 1st of February this year. There was also the provision for behaviour change support, information on regulations, reuse solutions, business resources, success stories, trying to promote where good things have happened. And VicGov, in conjunction with Australian Gov, has been investing in new recycling capability as well. for plastics ahead of the Commonwealth export ban. So I was in a presentation earlier today listening, hearing about that readiness for export, and it's one of those things, how do we understand what's coming and try and invest accordingly? There's also been grants from a Circular Economy Innovation Fund, Circular Economy Business Support Fund. We've got what's called a CBIC, which is our business centre, which helps people think differently and really design for a better solution. The collection stage is interesting. I think it didn't get that much attention. There was a lot of attention on the processing, and collection tended to be the weakness in the chain, so it's awesome to hear about the movement about improving collections. So with the collapse of RedCycle, as we know, and the exception of some council-level collection programs right now, there's minimal systems currently in place, so we really do need to look at that. And as I said, it's exciting to see the movement going ahead in that space. We need the large-scale collection and sorting of household soft plastics. The Victorian Government is supporting councils to provide the new standardised 4-stream household waste and recycling systems. So in Victoria, every household needs to be able to access the service for 4 streams. Interestingly, I see 4 bins out in the foyer. In Victoria, the paper is not the 4th bin, it's glass. That's another conference item. A service standard is being developed that will specify items that can be accepted and not accepted in that 4-stream system. Following extensive consultation, it is proposed to accept soft plastics in the mixed recycling stream from a future date. So the timing of inclusion of soft plastics in the mixed recycling stream will be informed by processing capacity and industry readiness to accept the material. There will be public consultation in the coming year of the draft service standard, draft regs, and we do a regulatory impact statement to understand and make sure we don't impose burden to get the reward. One of the reasons some might say, just do it, and I've heard about being brave, and certainly there is movement in that direction. We're not coming from the perspective of not being brave, it's more just making sure we don't create another stockpile situation by collecting things that can't be used. It has to be balanced, and we have to make sure that both ends of the system are propped up. Otherwise, you're just creating another issue. Sorting. Talking about another issue, there's negligible automated sorting capacity for soft plastics in the Victorian MRFs. Sorting and returning by consumers at home is limited by confusion, inconvenience. The business-to-business recycling is constrained by knowledge, cost and practicality. So we are really seeing these issues. Even if we did collect the soft plastics, some of the MRFs are saying they can't handle them, gets caught up in the machines, the sorting just isn't sophisticated enough. And that's going to be really important to make sure that they are enabled so that the right feedstock can go to the processing plants and get used to make the right end products that we can use. So a goal ensuring that soft plastics are sorted to a level that maximises the value, environmental benefit, and the size of the end markets for the subsequently reprocessed material. You hear a lot from the processing plants about feedstock quality, so the sorting design needs to match whatever expectations there are of people further down the chain. From Vic government perspective, there's been a regional recycling fund for $34.9 million over 3 years to commit to regional economic recovery from COVID-19 as well as creation of jobs. Round 1 provided grants of up to $500,000 per regionally significant resource recovery facility to help upgrade infrastructure for recycled materials, including plastic. Round 2 aims to reduce the costs associated with transporting recyclable materials in regional Victoria. It will invest up to $25 million in small regional MRFs for sorting, and it's currently processing EOI applications to progress to the next stage of developing business cases. There are opportunities and risks really when it comes to the sorting part of the value chain. We do need to improve the ability for the MRFs to sort. They can undertake manual sorting should the value of the sorted plastic bales be sufficient to cover the manual sorting costs, but that's got an upper limit too if you're running a plant. And MRF upgrades can be undertaken over time for sorting of plastics with things like optical sorting. So there is investment. It's just making sure they can see that ROI so they understand the net benefit for their organisation as well as the entire system. We're at the processing stage. Once the Close the Loop facility, so that's a facility in Victoria, is back in operation, there will be upwards of 20,000 tonnes of business to consumer soft plastic mechanical processing in Victoria. We just need more than mechanical, and it's great to hear the developments in some of the chemical processing that helps support going back into a food grade system, the things that mechanical can't do. By 2025, there may be somewhere in the range of 240,000 tonnes per year of chemical recycling capacity available in Victoria, which is really exciting. The growing demand for feedstock, however, does need to be balanced with collection and sorting capacity and capability. As I said, it is an entire system. Even a few months ago, there was actually a point where we thought, hang on a minute, is there too much processing? Are we going to have to generate more plastic to feed the beast? We don't really want to be in that system, but it is that whole thing about balance. So the goals are adequate capacity and strong demand forecasts with the highest and best use circularity. So you hear downcycle, what are they doing? Putting plastic in road base, isn't that a form of landfilling? And it's better than some other options. So we will evolve over time. I think we do need to celebrate what we can do and then evolve to a better and better highest and best use HABU system. Since 2016, VicGov have made record investment to deliver the biggest transformation in recycling. So we've really invested a lot lately to shift the needle potently, awarding over $127 million in grants to improve waste and recycling sector, which leveraged $345 million in investment, including $39 million from Commonwealth. So one of the things our partner organisation, Sustainability Victoria, do is work out the potency of the dollar. So who are they going to give money to? How is that dollar going to then attract federal funding or commercial funding? How does it match the system? And we build something to really inject the whole chain. So incentivise industry investment, reduce startup risks is really the opportunity here, and enabling secured feedstock tonnage and end product commitments. It's a tricky balance. I did spend 10 years in local government and then 20 years in manufacturing before I started in state gov. So I understand that balance of commercial operations wanting term, tonnage, technology, all the things that make them smile, but then a council too having to balance that, okay, I promise to give you waste for 25 years, even though they've got a strategy sitting over here that says they'll reduce waste. So it's a really tricky thing. We've got to get that right too. And the end products, the juicy one. End markets are developing in Australia. We've got in Victoria, for example, wood substitute products such as outdoor furniture, decking, garden products, shipping pallets, railway sleepers, fence posts, as well as uses such as asphalt additive, and that's that Close the Loop plant. They've got a product called Toner Plus, which is pretty cool. It's toners from toner cartridges as well as plastic into Toner Plus, goes to downer and goes into roads to reduce virgin material, which is, I like that kind of stuff. End markets for chemical recycled business to consumer soft plastics are potentially much larger than the available supply, so we do need to look at that balance. Our goal here is cost-effective, robust products matching specifications. That's a really important thing. We need to evolve the specifications to then pull the end product use. So in Victoria, we have the Big Build Recycling First policy. I heard a lot this morning about the need to incorporate recycled content where government procurement and leverage government procurement. So VicGov uses its purchasing power to drive demand for recycled products through this Recycled First program. So essentially, they've got a dedicated... I was in a session before talking about the power of having a strategy. If you've got a strategy and declare something, funding follows, resource follows, funding, resources then can actually spend their time breaking barriers. And that's exactly what the Big Build Recycling First initiative did with an organisation called Ecologic, who spend all their time breaking barriers for recycled content uptake. It's very, very cool. And also accompanied by Sustainability Victoria, which help local councils learn how to buy recycled. So last slide. The other things we do, so that's sort of end-to-end value chain, and then the other things we do are look at things like what are the systemic things we need to do to enable the entire system. Real big focus on data. I'm a chemist, I'm a bit of a data nerd, and I've got an amazing data team in Recycling Victoria. They used to work in Sustainability Victoria and they're over with us now. And really focusing on how do we shine the light on the data sources that are potentially missing for people like yourselves. It might be that you see a paragraph over here on processing, but you see nothing on sorting. How do we shine the light on that nothing and realise that that needs to be filled as well, and trying to find end-to-end data pictures so you can see exactly where the vulnerabilities are. We've launched our data hub. There are a couple of the things that you can see on the data hub, and we'll be evolving that. I might just leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Deb. Now, the final presenter today is Helen Millicer. So Helen is Director of One Planet Consulting. And really the question for Helen that the AFGC posed to her is, and you've heard it from Deb, you need EPR, you need brands funding this. It's going to be a co-fund situation, government's there, but brands are going to put money into this. So what is the global best practice design? How do you run a globally, what's the global peak of product stewardship? So we've engaged Helen, so I'll let Helen talk through that, and then we'll wrap up with about 25 minutes of Q&A.
You are taller. Hello, everyone. What a full room. It's so hard when you sit in the front row. You have no idea. Wonderful to see you all here. And yes, we are between you and the dinner tonight. So, but thank you so much for coming along. It just shows the passion, I guess, for industry transformation, which is what we're proposing to bring to Australia. So my name is Helen Millicer, and I'm delighted to be working with Barry on something that is so audacious for this country. I've worked for a long time in plastics manufacturing, a bit like Deb actually, and in systems change and within government. So here we go. I'm going to put to you a bit like Ross Garnaut. You remember Ross Garnaut talked about how Australia can become a renewable energy superpower? I believe because of the supply chain and the partners that we have in this country, with the resin manufacturers, the plastic manufacturers and so forth, we have the capacity, unique amongst many countries in the world, to actually become a global superpower for a circular plastics economy, and I'll set that out for you. And the NPRS, the National Plastic Recycling Scheme, is the key way in which we will drive that forward. So this is briefly about me, just so that you know that I'm working very closely with the National Plastics Recycling Scheme, with Barry and the AFGC for this program, but I have a couple of other hats. If you sat in the room here earlier with Richard Collins, you would have heard about a project that we worked on for the Australian Government about product design for circularity, which was launched just last month. I'm also on the board of the Tasmanian Government, and we're working through levies and new ways to disperse those funds at the moment, and a couple of other hats that I wear. Previously been involved with APCO, Victorian Government, the plastic bag ban, Recycling Victoria, and all those sorts of other things. So I fell in love with this diagram a number of years ago. The Europeans came to circularity actually through the lens of climate change. Climate change is the biggest problem that we have, that we face. Plastics in the ocean and those sorts of things is a big problem because it will impact our food supply. But if we do not tackle climate change, we are truly sunk. So they came to the issue of circularity through the lens of emissions reduction. And when I did my Churchill Scholarship in 2018, this was just published. And what they did in this particular report was they looked at steel, aluminium, cement, and plastics. You would think why plastics doesn't have the same kind of carbon footprint, but it is derived from oil and gas. So if you're going to move to decarbonise, you have to change the way you manufacture and your source of plastics. You cannot do it without it. Plastics are not just in packaging. Plastics in, I don't know what you're wearing, but the shoes that I'm wearing, the plastic sole, the clothing I'm wearing, all those sorts of things, the carpet, you name it, the electronic goods, as Richard talked about earlier, everything, plastics is in everything. So if we want to move to a circular economy and a low emissions future, we have to tackle plastics because it is part of our way of life now. It sustains the modern lifestyle that we have. What was significant about this report was that it identified that roughly there's about, for every tonne of plastics that is produced, there's 5 tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions. I'll say that again. For every 1 tonne of plastics, there's 5 tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions. If we want to turn that around, the most sensible thing we can do is have high quality mechanical recycling. We don't do that in this country, except for PET. That's it. PET is a tiny fraction of the 3 million plus tonnes of plastics we put into the market each year. Tiny fraction. So it's essential that we look broader than that in order we're going to achieve it. The next best is chemical recycling. The mechanical low quality recycling is still not as good as chemical recycling. So Andrea's point that she presented about the importance of us going to high value food quality recycling is absolutely vital. If you go to that report, all these links are live, so you can go through them there. Now, what's really interesting is how are we going in comparison to, say, countries like Europe and various around there. So you can see what is the European average. The European average is just shy of 40%. This is plastic packaging, so just a fraction of the whole, okay? And what they are achieving there is eye-watering. Their target for Europe in 2020 was 25%. They've exceeded it. Their target for 2025 is 50%. They have a strategy and they've broken it down by decade or by, every 5 years, how they're going to get there, and they're mapping it out. Many of these countries, some of them do not have CDS, and yet they are achieving outstanding results. How are they doing it? They're doing it through EPR. So what they are doing is extraordinary collection, sorting, processing, and end market systems. Where is Australia? Do people know where Australia is on packaging? Oh, way over there. This is where we are. So we're just a bit better than Malta. Okay? Just to have that in perspective. We collectively have a responsibility and a capacity in this room to drive that change. Now, if we don't do it, frankly, it won't happen. So we can point the fingers at government and brandos and so on, but collectively, we have to drive this change, and that is through a strategic and a systemic way. They're doing it through strategy, policies, having a carbon price, having bans at landfill, having EPR schemes, a whole wide range of measures, certification labels. They actually use and oblige by and go by certification labels. We don't do that here sufficiently. They have certification of recycling facilities. So you know if you send your product there, it's going to be well recycled and it'll be at a food grade level. They're the kinds of things that we need in this country. So here is a diagram that might be familiar to you. It's from the latest APCO report where they've identified the gaps. Our gaps are actually in every stage of the supply chain. So we have gaps in terms of what we are collecting. We have gaps in terms of recyclability. Well, recyclability, the first one. So we have 580,000 tonnes of soft plastics coming into the market. Of that, most of it is recyclable, but not all of it. So that's an issue that we have to address, and we are addressing through the National Plastic Recycling Scheme. We are moving to recyclable formats. We are having very low collection. We've got almost very large, which is going to landfill, and we've almost got none of it coming back into the system. So that map is good for setting it out. We should say that the soft plastics packaging includes pallet wrap, shrink wrap, bulk bags, clothing wrap, food wrap, chip and chocolate wraps, silage wrap. So there's a lot of stuff in there that is not just twisty packets. Why the poor results? Fundamentally, we have an old way, built pretty much for last century, and we're now in the 21st. So we need incentives. We don't have the incentives and priorities for, or currently our incentives and priorities in the system that we have is for high consumption and easy disposal. Straight to landfill. We have lack of policies, incentives and programs for improved design, efficient collection, reprocessing and recycled content. We focus on business as usual. We're reinforcing and perfecting the system that we have rather than actually changing the system. We need to move from that and move to a better. And we have insufficient strategy, guidance, commitments and forums bringing people together for those kinds of transformations. So consequently, we have the status quo and only tiny incremental improvement. What are they doing in Europe and other countries? Well, the UK has tried a plastic packaging tax. I'm not sure if anyone has tried to puzzle their way through the PRN system. Is anyone here from England? And can you explain it to me? It's worse than the carbon trading system for carbon. I find it just, plus to boot the fact that they have so many operators and there's no transparency. It is just, anyway, they've introduced a plastic tax of 200 pounds per tonne, and it's not working. They've just admitted it 2 weeks ago, and so it's now already under review, and it's only 1 year in. And so it's increased the cost of production, but hasn't actually increased collection, reuse, or recycled content. It's not a very good tax, really. So they've failed, unfortunately, on a number of fronts. The EU Council has committed to a carbon border adjustment mechanism, so Australia is in line of fire, like others, on imported products that don't have a carbon price. This is something the Australian government is referencing to and moving to, thankfully, finally. EU approvals are now underway for, this is really fascinating, they have acknowledged mechanical and chemical recycling innovations. This is as of last year. They've approved the closed and controlled supply chain for seed stock and processing, registration of approved facilities and quality assurance systems. This is what we propose for Australia as well. EU and EU Green Deal, I won't go into the details. New Zealand is underway with things, South Korea as well, likewise. And I mentioned earlier the extraordinary great work that's being done in other countries around green public procurement. So different countries are trying different things, and we will too for Australia. The Australian Government report that Richard spoke about earlier, I won't reference this, but I just simply wanted to say this strategic shift thinking is now coming in through here in Australia. We've proposed a strategy. The Australian Government has accepted this report, and these are some of the key recommendations that were in it. We have proposed such things as improving stewardship and introducing EPR to the country, establishing a reuse and repair reset program, aligning product standards and specifications with global best. Not that hard, you would have thought we might have done it, but yes. Establishing Eco-Design Innovation Fund, changing landfill fees, financial regulatory mechanisms, a Buying for Good program, learning and upskilling program, and of course public education. But that helped inform the work that I've been able to do with Barry and the NPRS. So this is a diagram that Andrea already had up, which sets out the vision and the plan for a circular economy. We are achieving this by working with all of those parties. So if you call us, and Barry or I, and we haven't replied straight away, it's because we are dealing with all the different parts of that supply chain to knit it together to bring about the conclusion that we need. The aims of the program are to increase the recycling rate of soft plastics packaging in Australia, to increase the availability of food and farmer grade soft plastic packaging, and to provide incentive for post-consumer recycled material back into packaging again. So, these are the various parties that we have been involved with, and the stewardship scheme that we are forming sits in the middle. The stewardship scheme will be at the heart of this and will help move material through the supply chain, support the various parts of it, and bring it to fruition. These are the brand owners that have currently signed up and are paying money to support the trials and the pilots, and there are more that are joining, and we're now moving beyond the AFGC members to sign up support to get brand owners from other categories as well. They're the first movers. The last thing I would like to say about the program is that the NPRS is introducing extended producer responsibility to Australia, and there are a number of golden rules that have been established internationally which will support the high functioning and the governance of this program. The most important ones that I want to point out is that it will be a not-for-profit enterprise. It will have ownership of the EPR of the program will be established to the obliged partners, i.e. the brand owners who are putting the packaging into the market. So contrary to various points of view, the brand owners are funding the scheme. There will be a measurable waste management target, transparency, equal treatment of the producers who are putting the material in, information available, EPR transparency, cost coverage, cost efficiency, eco-fee modulation, and monitoring and enforcement. So there'll be contracts between the various parties in the supply chain to provide surety, confidence, and long-term future. And the thing that makes it work, drives it, is the money. And the money is based around a member fee, a levy, which is paid by the brand owners, which supports, they pay per tonne put into the market, not on their turnover, like so many schemes we currently have in Australia. It's based on tonnage into the market. So that provides an incentive for them to reduce, okay? In terms of the waste hierarchy, reduce. Number two, recyclability. If they put recyclable material into the market, they get a bonus for that. And thirdly, for recycled content, there's a further advantage around that as well. So that will cover for scheme administration and the various actions that increase the recycling rate. So that's us. We took a photo when we got together at the Waste Expo in October last year. A number of those people are here in the room. Some of them are on the platform here. So these are all the happy people. So you can see that supply chain there, right through from the collectors and the brand owners who do the design, through to the plastic processors, through to the resin manufacturers, Viva Energy and Qenos at the end, and Barry and me there in the middle. So we have the collaborations, we have NDAs with all those partners, we have letters of agreement. So we are now transforming Australia into a global super circular plastics economy. We're doing it through the scheme. The results are coming in. Andrea has given you a brief overview of some of the trials that we have underway and now what we're moving to with the next phase. So we will help cut our greenhouse gas emissions. We will shore up the plastic supply chain in Australia. We will reduce the losses in the system. We will help ensure that we have circular plastics for the future for this country. So I think that's it. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the panel. That was very inspiring, and I hope everyone's wide awake. If you want to get up and stretch or anything for the last 20 minutes. So we're going to a Q&A. So it's a roving mic. So if anyone's got a question, we'll start down the front.
Thank you. Claire Nella from RAP Asia Pacific. Helen, I am British. I don't understand the PRN system, but in defence of the country of my birth, we have committed to EPR, so it should get better. It's a question, I think, really for the whole panel, but mostly the Andreas and Deb. So to build, you need a bankable contract, right, for your inputs, and to collect, you need the facility. Who jumps first?
There should be yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question, who jumps first? And I think in some ways we all need to jump at the same time, and I think that's where being brave, but it's tricky. And I think that this is part of, we go through steps to get to where we are today. So we've been having these discussions now for coming up 3 years in terms of chemical recycling and soft plastic packaging. So it started with feasibility work that was done, and that feasibility study that Licella ran was co-funded through industry. So we had Nestle, Coles, Amcor, Landell-Purcell, IQ Renew, and Licella all co-fund. And I think that the reason that these, making these steps towards achieving a better outcome for soft plastics and shifting the dial and making meaningful changes, we need everybody to come along on the journey at the same time. So we, there is a lot of inertia in the market. I think Red Cycle helped to bring attention to the things that we weren't doing and we needed to do. So it's been, whilst unfortunate and no one wants to see a business not succeed, it's good in terms of bringing attention to what wasn't happening. And so I think, there's an understanding that, yes, we need commitment on recycled content to underpin the financial investments for the facilities, but at the same time, people who are setting up the collection schemes and investing in that and upgrading various collection and sorting systems also need assurance that we're actually going to do what we say we're going to do in terms of building the facility. So I don't think there's an easy way to say who jumps first. I think we all do need to go on the journey together. And, I think there was a great phrase that came up yesterday in one of the morning sessions, and that was the tranquilizing effect, or something along these lines. I'm probably going to misquote them, and I'm sorry. But the tranquilizing effect of gradualisation. And so you can't just expect to do things gradually, softly. And I acknowledge that, yes, from a risk management and regulatory perspective, obviously we can't all be bold and brave every day. But yeah, data-informed decision making, but also making sure that we're moving together at the same time. You can't wait until, the 11th hour to make a decision on whether you're going to participate in the circular economy. We all need to be moving in that direction at the same time and building those systems at the same time. And that's where being able to collaborate in a way that's not anti-competitive, but you need to be doing things together, because if just one person is trying to, move first or waiting to be first to be second, then we're just going to end up having the exact same conversation this time next year. So I think, the ask to industry, and we're already seeing it, is these great things happen, like the KitKat pilot happened, because everybody was willing to go together at the same time. And yes, it might not be fast, but we're definitely going to achieve better outcomes. So I don't know if that answered the question, but I guess it just shows that it is a complex issue. And I think we all do need to move at the same time in parallel, because these things take time. Building this infrastructure takes time. Changing systems takes time. Setting up collection programs takes time. And so I think the fact that we're all on stage together having a conversation that's, open, and we may not always agree on everything at the same time, but, we're having these conversations about, okay, what are the barriers for you? What are the blockers? What do you need? So it's collaboration's really at the heart of it.
I agree. No. One of the cool things about the portfolio that I have in Recycled Victoria, there's 4 key pillars. The first one's data, and then risk management, and then infrastructure planning and strategic procurement. I mean, that is gold. And because I oversee a lot of it, I can see how they interplay. So I think they are all happening at the same time. For example, currently we're doing our database understanding of material streams and where the gaps are. That will inform our long-term infrastructure plan. That helps us understand, well, if every council has to have a 4-bin system by certain dates, if you do the maths backwards, when are their current contracts expiring, and when are they going to need to go into a new contract, and then overlay it with the gaps in infrastructure around the state, and you've got these potent times where you can actually do collaborative procurement, and that's where State Gov should at least talk to those councils and say, do you want a hand? Because I reckon in this case, you all need to get together. If we build it, they might come. You can collaborate your demand, and we might get a new site out of this. So that's the exciting thing, I think, of Recycling Victoria, and having all of those 4 things in my portfolio, because I can do them all together. And it's managing risk, but in a very slow with haste kind of way.
I simply want to say that we have got a giant spreadsheet and Gantt plan, and we are collaborating and talking with all the necessary partners. So we all understand that, we're building a bridge from the past to the future, and we are on this journey together. So we're working very closely with all the parties, like in that diagram. Thanks.
Great session, everyone. Thank you very much. Richard Collins from Arcadis. So Helen, while you've got the mic then, elephant in the room, red cycle, let's just go straight to it. What have we learned from that and how are we using that to inform design of the scheme?
The scheme was already partly formed before Red Cycle collapsed, so we already knew that Red Cycle was only collecting about 2% of soft plastics available going into the market, and that it was not, the financial model that it had was not a highly flexible model or reflective of the quantity being put on market. The companies that were putting the funds in was a relatively small pool, and in terms of contracts and having end markets, that was perhaps their biggest challenge that they faced. That's not what we're doing. So by working closely with the various parties, so whether it's IKEA Renew and the various MRFs that are involved in our scheme for the collection and the separation, plus also the end market players, absolutely we start with the end in mind. There's no point collecting if there's no for it to go, right? So we're working from that end, or that end that way, and making sure that we're making progress together. So we already have views and knew of the best practice schemes overseas, and that's how we also, the first year or so of the program before I started, Barry was leading research into models from overseas, and I'd already looked at them, so we were on the same page.
You just referenced Red Cycle. In some of our data that it showed that in the three to 4 months of the trial, we've been able to get more tonnage than what Red Cycle had in 10 years. So that's what the data showed us in some of the results.
So just on that, the early anecdotal data shows that within 3 months per household, we're collecting 5 times per household what Red Cycle collected in 10 years. So your participation rate and your ability to capture huge volumes is there, but we want more. So it's 5 times per household in 3 months versus Red Cycle in 10 years. Nothing against Red Cycle, but it just shows the power of convenience. And the other point that Andrea made, community wants to see circular outcomes. That was the number one objective that they liked about the scheme.
Hi, Gabby from Canada Bay Council. For Helen and Andrea, I'm sure you've had this question many times, but as a waste education officer, we've spent years telling residents don't put plastic bags in the recycling bin. So, yeah, what's your response to that?
Well, that's correct. That's what we've been telling them for a very long time. So, yes. But we understand that, look, and I was even talking to Costa a little bit earlier, we're talking about this compost order which changes, that we only want food scraps in a FOGO service, and for our region we've already have a well-embedded FOGO system that's been going for 8 years. So he just said it's time to just transition and make the change, and through education you'll need to just adapt. So yes, it is an issue, and we have been doing a lot of training around not having that material in the bin, but as long as it's captured, I suppose, in a way that we can sort it correctly, I'm sure that we'll have that buy-in from the residents.
Just thinking, Andrew, do you just want to show the bag? Just the design on that is going right to the heart of that issue. So it's really clear instructions what to put in and what not to put in. And again, we haven't got the results yet, but the anecdotal evidence is we've actually had bags scanned, broken apart, full analysis done of the contamination, if there is contamination, and then a polymer scan to determine the polymer makeup of what's in there. So, and the plan is to learn as we go and tweak it. So I know Deb mentioned that there's a date in the future for Victoria. So we've got to get through all these gates and these proof points and not just roll it out. So the whole point of the trials and the pilots is to get the proof points and test where there's a concern. If there's a concern in a MRF, concern for education, we've got to test and get a green light on all those potential risks.
So back to the heart of your question, yes, that's true. That's what we've been communicating for a long time, because they've been putting it loose in the bin. What we're giving them is a collection vehicle, i.e. a designated bag to put in the soft plastics. So that's giving it a home where previously it had no home. Well, look, put it this way, the results are coming through very positively that, you know, to have an acceptance of all households in an area and only 2% deciding they don't want to do it for some reason, that's a pretty good response rate. In fact, I think if anyone had a 2% response rate, they would be absolutely over the moon for a trial which only received a letter, no other communication. Yeah. Okay.
Lee Smith from Veolia, also the boards of APCO and ACOR. Question for Andrea from Albury. In terms of your key learnings from your trials, what are the 2 or 3 things that you advise collectors and sorters not to do? And what are the couple of things you'd say really worked well and you should include that in your system?
Okay, so probably what we need to do is maximise the amount of material going into this. People are just used to putting a curbside bin out every fortnight for recycling, and they felt that they just needed to fill their bag and throw it in. So that's going to be quite an education piece to make them understand we'd prefer to have a full bag and make that into a bit of a cushion to place in. When we talk to the MRF operator, it's a real concern that we're going to have a lot of volume. So, you know, in the trial we've only been dealing with a small amount of bags coming through, but as this develops and increases, they're going to have thousands of these bags, and how's that going to be managed? So, yes, it's a real concern, I think, that for a MRF operator. I think the process worked quite well. We weren't asking them to take out any contamination in part of their process either. So that's probably something that we need to consider and how that's going to be managed into the future. The other thing too is the actual bag itself. It's probably better that it's tied up at the top so it doesn't allow any of the product to come out the top. So there's a couple of key takeaways there. Did you want to add to that at all?
I was inspired, thanks for the question, Lee. I was inspired by what they're doing in New Zealand. So New Zealand has a bag like the scheme, the red cycle version, and they actually ask their residents to put it in based on weight. And I thought that's a brilliant idea. So we can say make it the same as a litre of milk or a kilo of sugar, and that would take us from a fortnightly and really, because the bag can take quite a considerable weight and volume and pressure from inside. It acts like a pillow inside the system, and once we get to larger scale production, we'll be able to specify, the elasticity and the puncture or lack of puncture and all those sorts of things of the bag to really make it a lot more foolproof.
Hi, Helen. Rob Kelman from Reloop. You know I'm going to ask a jaundiced old greenie question here. I think one of the concerns around this scheme is who is going to pay ultimately. And you've talked about a levy. Let me come back to that. But I guess from my experience, we've had a lot of schemes get going by industry as pilots. Public place recycling would be one, where there's sort of funding for trials and then industry walks away and leaves it to local government to fund later on. So that's my jaundiced sort of statement around the thing. One of our colleagues, Dominic Hogg, who you know probably, UK EPR expert, he talks about a cost of collection and processing about $5,000 a tonne. Yeah. And I think the FOSS Plus scheme is something like $2,500 per tonne of plastics put to market. Is that a reasonable? Yeah, that's my understanding, having looked at last year's invoicing of.
The comma is in the. They use a comma where we would use a full stop.
Are you saying it's $250 a tonne charge instead of $2,500 a tonne?
You've added 3 zeros. Yeah.
Okay. I'll go back and check that because it's not my understanding. My understanding is that we are talking about thousands of dollars a tonne for collection and processing and all of those sort of things. Can you give us any idea of what the levy is that you're talking about that would be a tonnage levy put to market?
Well, perhaps Barry, being the accountant, is probably best placed to answer this question. So there's a difference between what the price is now as we're going in the trial phase. So, you know, with any program, the trial, the cost is high. Going into the pilot phase, it will remain high, and it'll take a while for it to settle. So really, I think, you know, the value that the brand owners are putting in at the moment is not inconsiderable. And through the modelling that we're doing, which is based on costs, we have every expectation that the costs will come down pretty dramatically through various negotiations and programs that we're putting in place. Do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, good question, Rob. I get the exact same question from all our members, the whole supply chain on almost a daily basis. So one of the key aims and reasons we're running trials and pilots is to assess the cost. So it will be a not-for-profit entity, and it needs to fund the supply chain. There's some differences between what we're proposing, and we haven't settled on everything yet because it's still going through the process, but how far through the supply chain are you funding? Is it to the back of the MRF? Is it to the back of the pre-processor? Is it to the back of the advanced recycler? So in establishing that supply chain, there's some competition risks. If we try to fund too far into the supply chain, the ACCC will not authorise it. So we're getting some consultants and some competition lawyers' guidance on that. So that's probably a key difference between Europe and here. They fund a long way into the supply chain, whereas we have to let market forces prevail at some point to promote global trade. So that's part of that. But hand on heart, brands get this. They're paying EPR in all the countries. They want an efficient, effective scheme, but they want to make sure they can get the recycled content back. There's no use funding a scheme where it's not getting the outcomes. And so that's the learnings from the UK scheme, not having a shot at it. Sorry, but it's there's learnings there that they're going through like the third review. So in a way, we're lucky we can actually draw on the expertise and the learnings, and we're taking all that on. So happy to have any chats on that, Roberts. So brands will be funding.
There's about 6 people who put their hands up, so I'm trying. As long as everyone's happy for it to keep going, I can keep running, but feel free to call it when you need to.
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, afternoon. Great initiative. Joe Jerusalem, Noosa Council. I see I could see the understanding of the red bag to facilitate it in the current scheme or the current methodology of putting it in the recycle bin, so that it can be easily identifiable and easily removed at the MRF. But the irony for me is you're creating you're giving them a plastic bag to put their plastics in. Is this the long-term vision and future of how this will be collected? Because we're creating more plastic to collect plastic to put into a system to recycle plastic. So I just see some shortfalls if this is the future. If this is the future of it, I understand that that's the methodology to facilitate the trial. Taking MRFs along, soft plastics and paper and all the rest of it, and a MRF will all fly away equally. So they're going to be challenging if they're not collected in some way, shape, or form. So, what do you see as the future methodology for collection of soft plastics within the yellow bin? And do we have to supply a plastic bag? The irony being that supermarkets are phasing out single-use plastic bags. That could have been the supply solution. That bag is the one, because that's what we used to do at home. If with the red cycle system, we would use the cereal box, the cereal plastic would be the collection source, and we'd shove it in that. Anything but another plastic bag.
There's lots of questions there, Joe. So, no, that's all right. It's like when we had lunch. So a couple of things. You don't want to use a paper bag if you're trying to collect soft plastics. So it has to be a consistent polymer, because what ultimately we want is to just put it straight in. The scheme will provide incentive for reduction, reuse, recycled content, all those sorts of things. We are already seeing a diminution in the amount of soft plastics in the system. It will continue to decrease. What else did you say? Now, that's an interesting thing. So the data would appear to show to us that a designated, very visible bag will make it really easy for the MRF to spot it. So that's what we're seeing so far from the MRF audit results. We've done audits of 4 MRFs completely separately by an independent auditor to identify that. That's what is the data seems to be telling us at this point in time. We also think that if it means that there is one consistent bag across the whole country, it makes communications really easy. We move away from the multiple bin lids, the multiple colours, the multiple, and we just have one consistent bag. That's the way we're preferring to go forward with this, because it then means it's really super keen. Everyone, no matter where they live, they know exactly what to do with it. Does that answer your question? In terms of... Yes, but if it's got recycled content, we're closing the loop on it, so we're doing exactly what we're encouraging the industry to do. No, we're not actually creating... Anyway, that's an interesting point. But no, we wouldn't, because we actually we become one of the procurers of recycled content. Not at the moment, because... Yes, they would. That's right. Yes. Okay, long answer to your question. Correct. What else was there in there?
I saw in New Zealand they use clear plastic bags to put waste out on the road, and I never understood.
We've got 2 minutes to run, so we'll do one final question.
Give it to Eric.
I can't go past that.
Hi, it's Belle from BC Consulting. Helen, when I saw reuse and repair up on that screen, I started dreaming of plastic bags taped up and Australia Post satchels inside out. Like, what is the vision? What is the practical application of reuse and repair for this stream?
Oh, for this? Yeah. Well, the recycled content is the thing, and the reduction and the having it compliant to CFLEX guidelines. So bringing in international standards for recyclable packaging into Australia for soft plastics is a key thing. We don't have that at the moment, so that's one thing as well. So, but in terms of moving to reusables, that's another conversation that we have to have in this country. We do not have policies, programs, targets for reusable almost anything, let alone repairable. But that's another topic. Let's do that another day. Like Richard and I could run a whole session on that alone. Yeah, out of that report.
So I think we're a few minutes over. So if anyone, I know everyone here probably would prefer to have this chat than have dinner, but if you want to hang around, we can. The panelists, I'm going to volunteer the panelists to hang around and not have dinner, but we'll have one last question, and then we'll close off and we'll hang around for any other further questions.
Andrea Polson from CMAC Technologies. And my head is spinning a little bit, unfortunately, I have to say. That's why I need to understand, or I'd like to understand the intention with regards to making sure that we're getting to the outcome we want, which is the minimum consumption of CO2. So we want to reuse the embodied energy, and we don't want to use so much CO2 to produce the material, which you showed in your slide really well. I really like that. But what was missing here, and that's what Deb was referring to, of 220,000 tonnes in Victoria of reprocessing capacity, I don't see that in mechanical recycling. There's no incentive, or there's no real plans towards mechanical recycling. What are we doing in this scheme to ensure we're driving it to mechanical recycling and not having a white elephant sitting there to some extent that's funded by large brands in order to facilitate their so far long-term oil gas refinery process, and make sure we just reuse before it goes back into chemical processing, reuse it as much as we can. Doesn't seem, I don't see that incentivization in that process at the moment. I don't know if there is one.
I can start, and then if others want to add. It does come back to that the market the market balance across the entire system. So where there are end products that use a mechanical processed output, then that's great, because there is actually uptake and there's no need to take that stream into a chemical alternative, and yet mechanical won't satisfy the entire cohort of plastics coming in. Some work really well and some don't work really well, so I see it as a complement rather than an entire shift towards chemical. There's a balance there.
I agree.
Yeah. My only comment is the scheme is technology agnostic. So we've recently released an EOI to the market for feedstock. Yeah, so there's ACCC processes to go through as with any scheme. So we're not going to say it's all advanced recycling. There's obviously mechanical recycling options, and it will follow a waste hierarchy and market guidance based on those principles. We need the highest value, but you also know that in any processing you get yield losses and you get downcycling and essentially upcycling or full circularity. So that's the model based on Europe. So I think I will draw a close to it. Thank you very much for your patience, but if you want to hang around and ask any questions, please do.